Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing the Sharks protected list for the upcoming Seattle expansion draft. All 30 teams in the league had to submit this list, besides Vegas, of course, and this was submitted yesterday, and all of these lists were revealed this morning. And for the Sharks, there were a couple of notable names, but not a ton of surprises. Couture, Kane, Hertl, Meyer, and LeBanc, as expected, left protected, and Rudolph Balcers, after his solid performance this season, is the 6th forward protected. However, the 7th, I had been deciding between Donato and Gambrell. I thought that the Sharks would end up going with Gambrell, but instead they go a bit off the board with Jonathan Dahlen, as many people, honestly, around the Sharks were discussing that they probably would end up protecting this player, as they didn't necessarily value Donato and Gambrell all that much, and because the Sharks prospect pool is rather barren, maybe they want to keep a decent prospect there. The question is just how decent Dahlen is as a prospect. He had an extremely solid season across the ocean in Europe, but that was in the second tier league of of Sweden. Not even the first tier league, so it's kind of hard to make a translation of how well he's going to actually do at the NHL level when you're sort of that far removed from that style of game. So it's possible he comes over and is an effective forward, but it's possible that he never really breaks out of AHL level. And the thing is now you're protecting Dahlen over players like Donato and Gambrell, who are proven to at the very least be NHL caliber. Gambrell, a decent-ish fourth liner, and Donato can be a solid third liner. We'll see if this protection ends up actually working out. The other notable name for the Sharks is on the defensive side. They protected Karlsson and Vlasic, of course, as they had to. I don't even know if they actually asked these two players to waive their no movement clauses, but neither did in this situation. And the third name, this was also a decision whether it would be Brent Burns or Radim Shomek, and the Sharks decided to go with Brent Burns. And interestingly enough, the reason I had given in my expansion draft preview video for the Sharks protecting Brent Burns was sort of a hockey culture reason, a sort of respect reason for what Brent Burns has done for the San Jose Sharks. But if we look around the NHL, that's not really something that was respected by most of the other general managers. I mean, the Montreal Canadiens, who just made it to the Stanley Cup Finals off the back of Carey Price, left Price unprotected in the expansion draft. St. Louis left Vladimir Tarasenko unprotected in the expansion draft. The Avalanche left their captain, Gabriel Landeskog, unprotected in the expansion draft. So seeing Brent Burns off this list would not have been that much surprise in the grand scheme of things, but he finds his way here, so the Sharks will not be losing one of their large contracts on the defensive side at this expansion draft, unless of course a trade is made, which is at this point relatively unlikely. And in terms of goaltender, no real surprise here, as Adin Hill is protected. It was going to be Koshnash, but Koshnash was traded in for Hill, and obviously, Martin Jones is not going to be protected, so Hill is here. In terms of players who were left unprotected, we have a few notable names. At the top is, of course, Radim Shomek, in a situation where the Seattle Kraken are going to be looking for defensive help. Shomek is a very good choice, and honestly, based purely on what they can do on the ice, Shomek is probably just generally the best choice, but the major problem there with Shomek is his injury history at this point. This past season, he was only able to play about 13 to 15 minutes per night because it just seemed as though he couldn't really do much more than that, and the injury is potentially something to blame in that regard. So if Seattle is doing their homework and they know that this is a problem with Shomek, they may actually end up skipping over him to take one of the Sharks' many forwards who are available. At the top of that list is Ryan Donato. I really thought Donato shouldn't have been left unprotected, but of course nothing was going to convince the San Jose Sharks, who seem to have it convinced that Donato is a complete liability on the ice. So it is very possible that Seattle take him and make him actually into a very decent player, like Vegas did with a lot of players a few years ago in their expansion draft. Another option, if the Seattle Kraken decide to go a bit more defensive, would be to take Matt Nieto. He had a pretty solid season with the Sharks, unfortunately got injured about halfway through, but he's a decent penalty-killing option, as well as a decent, fourth to third line player who can potentially play up in the lineup if something ends up happening. So he could definitely be a very solid choice as well. And then there is Dylan Gambrell. I guess you could go with Gambrell if you're hoping for a bit more of a younger version of Matt Nieto, but it feels as though Gambrell is kind of just a worse version of Matt Nieto in every which way. So unless you're really hoping that the age thing is going to work in Gambrell's favor and he's going to develop more into a solid player, you probably just go for Nieto if you're looking for that type of player. And finally, there is, of course, Martin Jones exposed, but with the amount of other solid goaltenders who are exposed and the fact that Martin Jones has a completely awful and terrible contract, he is going to be a San Jose Shark by the day after the expansion draft. But that will do it. It'll definitely be a very interesting Wednesday when the expansion draft does roll around. In terms of a prediction, it's kind of hard to say because I do not exactly know what the Seattle Kraken are going to be targeting, as if they need the defensive help, they'll go Shemek. If they want more offensive help, they'll go Donato. If they want more sort of solid forwards, they'll probably go Matt Nieto. So at this point, it's just pretty clear that the Sharks are going to be losing a decently solid player, but they may not be as poorly off as other teams around the league. Class dismissed.